Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited because this is the time when we actually can get out and be doing some gardening.
Isn't it? Even from the last week, we've been here. I think, maybe that Saturday, I was like, I think I'm seeing a little spot of green in my neighbor's lawn. And now today I'm looking out and there's green popping up all over the place. We are seeing things greening up.
So we don't even have, it's not even wishful thinking anymore.
No.
I think the green is actually there.
Yeah, the green is there. The tulips in my yard are coming up. I think in other places they've been coming up for a while. Really, things are really waking up and coming up, aren't they?
And we are on the verge of a very nice busyness. Actually being able to get out in the yard and garden and do these tasks, the spring tasks that are needed. And man, so that's why I'm looking forward to hoping for some really nice days because it's fun. The tasks that you do this time of year, they're a lot more enjoyable, of course, on a nice sunny day.
Yeah.
So I'll probably even take some afternoons off and get done what we all need to get done.
Well, and we had a very mild winter, but still it's so nice to be able to be outside and be in your yard and not, things in some areas have dried up a little bit, so you're not just dealing with mud everywhere and you're not concerned about just squishing things
and the
down.
Spring aroma.
Spring aroma.
I love the smell of the air.
It's good. It's great. So we've got some things that we're going to talk about today about things that people should be doing in their yard, kind of the prep work, where things should be and what they should be doing in their yard.
Yeah, and so it's fun to take this kind of a mental walk around the yard and garden and see, okay, what are the actual tasks that we should be doing, should and can be doing this time of year? So yeah, that's what the program is about today, taking that mental walk around and looking to see, okay, yeah, these are the tasks that we need to be doing. These are the tasks actually that I'm going to be starting this weekend.
Well, so let's walk right into the yard, and the first thing that we're going to see is the lawn, and we've talked about it, that green is coming up. So, what are the things that we should? What's next? What should we be doing? What should we be looking for, and what should we keep an eye on? And what should we be doing with the lawn?
Yeah, a lot of times people wonder, when should I start raking? When should I start raking? Well, first of all, the question is, do you need to rake a lawn every year, or what? When do I know if I need to rake a lawn? And of course, talking about the good old-fashioned kind of broom rake that would pull up all the old fluff. Well, a certain amount of thatch is good. Thatch is the brown kind of undecomposed stuff that you rake out of a lawn. A certain amount is good because it helps conserve. It kind of makes its own mulch down the grass, helps conserve moisture, helps block out weeds, keeps the roots cooler. So a certain amount of that is needed. We don't want to pull all of that out. One thing you can do is, cut a little with a sharp butcher knife, cut a little plug out of the soil. And if you've got a layer that's maybe over half an inch, then you need to pull some of that out because it could be keeping water from going down, keeping fertilizer from penetrating down. But take a look. But if you've got maybe half an inch or less, you do want some of that in there. So we don't want to totally pull all of that out. But also, if it looks like your lawn is matted, the grass is matted down, just laying flat. And also if it has some snow mold on, not much snow mold this year, but spots alongside the driveway where you maybe did shovel the little bit of snow we did get. Those are areas where the grass is often matted down, gets a little moldy. So those are good areas to pull the rake across, fluff it up, get some air down into it, especially those matted areas.
And with that, I've seen some people talk about use the kind of maybe the backside of the rake for that, right? That some people can use that if you're concerned about pulling up too much.
Out. You don't want to physically be tearing out grass plants. And so
is that being overly cautious? Does that really matter that much, do you think? Or is it just okay?
Yeah, in fact, a good rule of thumb, if the lawn is too wet and too moist yet, and you go ahead and rake, you can actually be tearing out some of the grass plants, and of course that'll thin out the lawn. So a good rule of thumb is the scientific genes test, and that is to kneel down on the lawn, and if you come up with a big wet spot on your knee, it's probably too wet, too moist. But if you come up and it's dry, then you should be good to go. Go ahead and rake it if it's needed. Now, that also brings up the question about power raking, which is also called dethatching. That's where the piece of equipment goes through and really brings up that old thatchy stuff out. But again, not every lawn needs power raking. But if you were to determine with that profile cut out of the lawn that you have a thatch buildup. If it's not breaking down quick enough, so over half an inch, then maybe a good power raking might kind of get air and nutrients and water penetration down in better. So, so if you did determine that your lawn would benefit from power raking, all the university turf researchers say to wait until the lawn it has greened up well, maybe after it's been mowed a time or so. So we're talking about May. Don't do power raking too early because that is a fairly intense procedure on a lawn, and it can damage if it's done too early. So it's probably better to wait until that lawn has firmed up, is actively green and growing, and then that's the time to do the power raking. So anyway, raking, if it's needed. And of course, then that also brings up kind of the next thing is when should we be fertilizing our lawn? The old recommendations, if you read some of the old recommendations, it mentions to fertilize in early spring to get the grass to green up. Well, modern turf research has shown that's kind of like force feeding the lawn before it's actually ready to use those nutrients. Then if we get a heavy rain, a lot of that fertilizer could be washed down the drain, and the lawn just isn't ready to use it yet. So the current recommendation for fertilizing is to delay until the grass is green and actively growing, and at that point, the roots can absorb the fertilizer and it goes to most efficient use. So we're talking more like Memorial Day is the target date for fertilizing instead of putting it on too early. And of course, if you fertilize earlier, it's not going to kill the grass, but that's not the most efficient and beneficial time to apply the fertilizer.
Because it is you're buying the fertilizer. It's not necessarily cheap. It is an investment. You do want to put it on at the maximum where you're going to get the maximum benefit from it.
Yeah, and you mentioned maximum benefit. So is there a difference in lawn fertilizers between the cheap economy ones and the more expensive national brands? There is. Excuse me. If you take a look at the fertilizer analysis, that's the numbers on the bag, the more expensive will probably have a higher fertilizer content in. It might also be in a release form that will release a little better, maybe a little slower release, so it'll last longer. And also, some of them have the micronutrients, such as iron, to keep the lawn really nice and green. So there is definitely a difference. Sometimes there's more science and research in the national brands that might be a little more expensive. I've tried both. I've gone to the national brands because I feel they just work a little better on the lawn, but any of the fertilizers will add nutrition to the lawn. Also related to that, and fertilizing does really help.
Yeah.
Grass likes that nutrition, so it will fill in much better with fertilizer. When I mentioned fill in also, for lawns that might be thinner, the spring is a great time to do a little seeding. Maybe you've got a new spot that you need to seed, or you're wanting to overseed and thicken it up a little bit. The spring is a good time to do that. Now, our adapted grass varieties, Kentucky bluegrass and fescue, need a certain amount of soil warmth in order to sprout. So it doesn't pay to put the seed on too early because as we're doing this as we're taping this podcast, and what is the date today, John? The 11th,
Yep.
April 11th?
Yep.
Okay, and this will hit the airwaves shortly after this. But anyway, looking at about the middle of April here, our soil is still chilly. As of today, the soil temperature in Fargo, and I looked at the soil temperatures all around the state, they're still in the high 30s, 38, 39 degrees. Now, Kentucky bluegrass grass seed does not sprout, doesn't germinate until temperatures reach about 50 to 55 degrees.
And is a sustained
Exactly.
temperature,
in
not
the
just
2 to
one
4
time.
inch.
Yeah.
And okay, so where do I get these soil temperatures? I look at the NDAWN, NDAWN, stands for North Dakota Agriculture Weather Network. I look at their website. They've got temperature readings that are updated daily all across North Dakota. And so this morning it was just 38, 39 degrees. And so still chilly. It's going to take a while to warm up to that 50 to 55 degrees at the 2 to 4 inch soil depth. Now, if we put the grass seed out too early, of course, the sparrows are going to enjoy feeding
Right.
on that, so they're going to thin out the grass stands. And so watch the soil. May is probably a better month to seed than April. And also, when you are shopping for grass seed, there's a big difference in quality. And grass seed that lawn will be there for, I don't know, a century or so, possibly. So it pays to buy the good stuff. And when I say the good stuff, look at the label. And for our area, the grass seed should be about 50% Kentucky bluegrass. So when you are comparing the grass seeds, look at the label and choose one that has at least 50% Kentucky bluegrass. For a shaded area, it'll have a higher percentage of fescue.
Okay.
And so, yeah, buy the good stuff. The cheaper grass seeds oftentimes have just annual grasses. Maybe they're varieties that aren't quite as adapted to our area, but it pays to spend a few more dollars. Buy the good stuff because it's going to be in place a long, long time for the seeding.
In general, do you do one before the other when it comes to fertilizing and seeding? Is it good? Do you want to have a window or a break between the two of them for people maybe who are like new to their lawn or have moved into a new house and want to make sure everything's
frequently asked question because the regular for established lawns, that fertilizer is fairly potent. And on newly emerging little seedlings, that could burn it. And so there are lawn fertilizers, that are labeled for newly seeded lawns. And so shop for that one if you are seeding at the same time. So the lawn fertilizer for newly seeded lawns can be applied either before or after. It's friendly to newly seeded lawns. So you can do, either before or after, but it won't burn the lawns. So select that fertilizer.
And for people like me who have dogs, dogs can do a number of can do some damage to a lawn. So especially over winter. What do you recommend for people who see spots that maybe
lots of water?
Okay.
Yep, lots of water to dilute the urea. It's actually can be a form of fertilizer, except it's just too potent.
Right.
And so we need to dilute it. And that's probably the best way to get that down out of the root zone area. Just lots of water. So on those spots, let the hose really run and dilute that. And then you're fine to go ahead and reseed. Reseeding is probably the best area, the best practice.
And of course, after we reseed and we fertilize, well, then sometimes we get some things that we don't want in the lawn. We get weeds. Is there something that we should be doing early on about weeds?
A frequently asked question is about the weed and feed, products, the combination fertilizer with weed killer in. And a frequent question that I have is that I receive is that it just didn't work well. What did I do wrong with the weed and feed? Well, when a person looks at the label of those, the herbicide part, the weed part of that, the granules have to stick to actively growing weeds. Okay, so the directions oftentimes say apply when the lawn is dewy, or sprinkle it a little first. Because see, those granules, if everything is dry, those granules are going to just run off, and they're not going to stick to the weeds. And so, a couple of things there. The weeds have to be actively growing, and then the granules stick to the weeds, and the weed killer then kills or burns down the weed. For weeds that aren't growing yet, that's not going to work. There's not going to be any effective control. And so most of our lawns also are not a carpet of weeds. So carpeting the lawn with a weed-killing product usually does no good. And of course, you're paying quite a bit. A better alternative is just to fertilize and then apply the weed control separately. And the effective weed control herbicides are on actively growing weeds. We have to let the dandelions grow. We have to let the thistles grow. Things that are coming back from those winter hardy roots like thistle, dandelions, etc. There are no preventers that will stop those. We have to allow them to get leaves and then apply an herbicide. So I like spot treatment of a lawn weed type herbicide, just to go out, and it doesn't take that long with your little sprayer. To go out and dab each one. Doesn't take that long. And so spot treatment is oftentimes good because there really aren't preventers. One thing we can prevent, though, as long as we talk about weeds, is crabgrass. Now, crabgrass, we have to make sure it's crabgrass and not quackgrass. Quackgrass comes back from a winter hardy root system. You can just, if that grass starts growing, usually it's kind of a bluish green, and it starts growing earlier than crabgrass, which I'll get to in a minute. But the actual quackgrass, you can just dig up a little and to identify, and it will have those white runners, kind of a tannish white runner right under soil surface, and that is quackgrass. That's coming back in most cases from that winter hardy root system. The actual crabgrass is an annual grass. It has to grow back each year from seed that it puts down the summer before. It does not have a winter hardy root system, which means it doesn't appear in the lawn as early because the seed has to sprout, and then it has to grow into a little seedling, and then pretty soon you see it. Well, the crabgrass seed doesn't start germinating until soil gets to about 50 or 55 degrees. And then it'll start sprouting, then we would see it. So there are crabgrass preventers. If you have ever looked in the hardware stores or chain stores or garden centers, you see all these bags of crabgrass preventer. Okay, so that's targeting that grass that'll start sprouting. And now that has to be in place before the soil reaches 50, 55 degrees.
Okay.
So if you put it on too late, the crabgrass seed is already sprouted and your preventer doesn't do anything. A target date is often April 15th to have that in place. But that varies so much by the season. Like I say, right now, the soil temperature in Fargo on April 11th is 39 degrees. But we need to watch that soil temperature and have that product in place before the soil temperature gets to 50, 55 degrees, and that crabgrass will start to sprout. So we need that to be in place. Also, when you read the label on that, the granules of that product, crabgrass preventer, have to be activated by water, by moisture. The granules have to turn into a solution then that creates a barrier on the soil surface. And so that means you have to water afterwards or put it on right before we're going to get a quarter inch of rain or so. So that's the story on the crabgrass preventer.
So we've talked about the lawn. Our lawns will be now, with all this advice, we're going to get a good head start. We're feeling good.
And the rains are going to come just at the right time. They're going to be green and lush, our lawns.
Yep, they're going to be nice, gentle, but fulfilling rains. So let's go over to our perennial garden.
Yes.
What are the things that we should be doing now? Because not necessarily, there are some things that are coming up, but what should we be doing there?
Yeah, busy time in the perennial garden because most of the perennials are best left with the above ground portions intact over winter. Helps catch a little bit of snow. They winter better. Little pollinators are overwintering, making their nests in those stalks. So good things happen when you leave the perennial tops intact over winter, which means in the springtime, we need to clean those up. The tops that I do recommend, when we talked about fall cleanup, hosta, iris, daylilies, all just plop apart. Over winter, hosta leaves by the spring, they're all kind of mushy, and daylilies are just laying flat. And peonies should be removed in the fall for disease control, kind of back down to about ground level. But most of the others, if they have kind of a woody, substantial top, are best left intact. But that means in the spring here, and now, middle of April or so, is the time to remove them, to cut them back. They should be cut back before or just as new growth is starting to emerge from the soil. For example, ornamental grasses, same case, wait till spring to cut them back. But if the new growth starts to come kind of from the base, if the new growth gets too high, it gets intermingled with the old dead stuff, and then you go to cut back the old dead stuff, and you're cutting back some of the good green as well. So watch your perennials carefully. And for me, it's going to be this weekend. I'm going to go cut back the ornamental grasses because I haven't seen any green grass yet, but I'm going to cut them back to about an inch above ground level for the ornamental grasses and all of the other perennials too. The fall blooming sedum, Yeah,
Yep.
almost lost the name for a minute. But the fall blooming sedum and all the other perennials that I've left intact, I want to get those above ground portions cut down about an inch before the new growth starts. And in April here, our coldest temperatures should be behind us now. And so now is a good time to remove all those. And then that'll let the new growth come on up and out.
We're talking about, you were talking about cutting back the ornamental grasses. I know we've got 2 Carl Foresters that we've liked, but they've been there for a couple of years. We want to try something new, and we also think that something else would do better in that area. Is this a time to dig up maybe some things that you know are not going to that you don't want there? Because we're still a ways away maybe from planting, but is this a good time to dig some stuff up?
It is. Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect time. Just about the time that a little new growth would be started, or even before. We don't want to let perennials get too much tops on and then start digging and dividing and moving, because the more new growth that they have, they're going to be disrupted more. And so we try to get those just as they're getting a little growth or even before. So now the Carl Forester grass that you have, maybe you want to move it to a different location, or maybe the center of it has died out if it's been in place quite a while and all the good stuff is on the perimeter. Now, many perennials can be moved, dug, divided in the spring. Others need to wait till fall. There's a good way to tell. You just select the time to do this operation opposite its bloom time. Because when a perennial flower is blooming, that's the time it's most sensitive. It doesn't want to be dug and monkeyed with. For example, good examples are peonies. Okay, they're going to be blooming in May or early June. So they don't want to be dug and divided in spring here. The time to dig and divide peonies traditionally is around Labor Day in September. So usually you can, in your mind, kind of picture when the things are blooming, and then you do it opposite that time. For example, Carl Forester grass, the seed heads are the bloom, and that doesn't happen until late in summer. So that's a spring thing. Hosta are another good one. Hosta, when it sends up its flowers, that's not until late in the summer. So that's spring divided. So the majority of things probably do get to things. The majority of perennials are usually spring divided, but some of those, if they bloom early, you wait until fall.
All right. Well, we're going to take a quick little break. When we come back, we're going to move on to the trees.
Great.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back, and we're talking about now that the garden and the yards are starting to wake up a little bit. The things that we can do. What's kind of the appropriate time to do some of these things? What are the first steps that we should take into the yard and garden? We talked about the lawns, we talked about the perennial gardens, but let's talk about the trees. What should we be doing with the trees now? Because they're just starting to bud out. I haven't seen any leaves yet, but they're coming.
Yeah, the buds are swelling. They're looking so much like they're going to pop at any time, and given warm temperatures, they will. So any trees that need pruning can and should be done now while they're still dormant. The reason for that is both trees and shrubs. If they start to leaf out already and then you prune, well, they've wasted energy producing those leaves. So to conserve that energy, just do the pruning when they're still dormant. Then that new energy can go into producing new leaves, new vigorous type growth. So any trees that you want to prune, including fruit trees, can be pruned now while they're still dormant. We've got a little bit of window yet. There are a couple of trees, though, that should be delayed with pruning, and that is birch and maple. The reason for that is if done at this time of year, just as they're about to leaf out, they bleed. They produce a lot of sap, and out of the pruning cuts, you'll get a lot of stuff running on down. It's not going to kill the tree, but it's unsightly, and you get all the stuff oozing down. And so you see maples, same with tapping for maple syrup. They're going to send out a lot of sap. And so instead, for a birch and maple, delay until the leaves are out and have expanded. Those we do wait until they're already actively growing. Everything else when they're dormant.
I would think with those cutting into a maple or a birch and you getting the sap running, I would think that could also attract things that you don't want on there.
Ants will start,
and that could damage the
it.
tree, or at least it would make it kind of unsightly. And
exactly. Yeah, and then of course mold will probably start growing on that sap, and so it doesn't make a good situation. And the other thing with trees, especially fruit trees that you've wrapped for winter, or other trees, if they have a tree protector on around the trunk, that should be taken off for the summer. So now, take those off. The reason for that is we want the trunk and the bark to have good air, good sunshine, plenty good airflow. If you leave that wrap on all summer, there's moisture under there, insects, molds, different things can occur. So take those off. Stick them in the garden shed or the garage and put back on in November again. So with tree care, and of course, mulch, if you haven't mulched around a young tree, we talk about the 5-5-5 rule. A diameter about 5 feet, 3 to 5 feet, and a thickness of mulch, such as shredded bark, of about 5 inches, because that's going to settle down. And kept about 5 inches away from a trunk.
Yeah, you kind of want a donut around the tree trunk, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep, and instead of right up on the tree trunk itself. Say, do you know what a tree's reaction might be if you get the shredded bark on too thick?
No.
It might say, that's a bit mulch. So anyway, with trees, there's not a whole lot you need to do. They really don't need much fertilizer because there's natural fertility in the soil. And but make sure you take the tree wraps back off. And if we do have dry spells, if we don't get spring rains, I've already gotten emails from people wondering, should we water our trees because we missed the rain? Right now, when they aren't in full leaf, they aren't demanding a whole lot of water. But if we do have a dry spring, then one good deep soaking, maybe that's every 3 or 4 weeks, a good deep soaking where you've let the hose run at the base of the tree instead of frequent light sprinklings. But yeah, if you're dry, soak it down good, and that'll hold it for quite a while.
I know I've got a reminder set on my phone, and it's gone off, that our maple tree on the side of the house, we have to add chelated iron. And so this is a good time to do that, right? Before, if you've got a tree that maybe, so for people who don't know, but like our tree will kind of turn early and the leaves will drop early. And so you add the iron to it because it's an iron maples. Deficiency.
Right.
And so you want the iron. You can find this in a garden center, and you either mix that up. There might be spikes that you kind of pound into the ground too.
There
release
are,
it. Yeah.
but your type that you would mix up and kind of pour on, that reaches the roots better.
Yeah,
distributes better among the roots. But yeah, I'm impressed. What a good idea! So you've had your phone set to remind you to apply the iron, because a person could get busy in the spring and neglect it. Then all of a sudden, in the middle of summer, your maples are all yellow, and a person wished you would have. But so, coming up on to, late April, May, when the roots are waking up and growing, they'd be able to take up that iron. Yeah, so good idea.
And you want to do it kind of do you want to do it while they're still, do you look at the leaves for indication of when to do it? Do you want to do it like while they're budding out, or do you want to do it while the leaves are out?
They're budding out.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, when you apply the iron solution around the area, and follow the directions on the product, of course, but when you apply that, it's going to take a little bit of time for those roots to take it up. They've got to absorb it. Then they've got to pump it through the tree's root system and out to the leaves. So that process takes a while. So as long as when the roots start waking up, which is happening pretty quick, you may as well have that product on and start the tree absorbing it and taking it on up. So I would not wait until the leaves are fully expanded. I would get that in place.
Okay. Well, good to know. So talking about the trees, let's move into the landscape a little bit, and let's talk about some of our Or shrubs.
Yeah, lots of work in shrubs.
Bushes, yeah.
Maybe a shrub has gotten a little overgrown. Maybe it's over the sidewalk and you need to do a little trimming. That can be done now before they leaf out much so they don't waste energy producing leaves that would just cut off anyway. So a little bit of trimming. But what if you've got like a dogwood, a red twig dogwood, and they grow so nice and fast, but over time the trunks seem to get kind of woody and they're just not as red as you liked them. Nine bark's kind of the same thing. So sometimes they just need a good rejuvenation. And by rejuvenation, that means you cut them back and force good new growth. For example, a dogwood, a red twig dogwood, if it's old and woody and no longer looks so nice, you can cut it back to, I like to cut it back to 3, 4, 6 inches above soil level. Force the new growth out, and the new growth will come out nice and fresh and very red in the case of the dogwoods. 9 bark, that'll rejuvenate. And that works in, I would say, 99.9% of the cases. If a shrub was otherwise not hardy, or I shouldn't say not hardy, if it was not healthy, there's always one that might just not have the vigor to come back. But that works so well. It does not work on evergreens. Evergreens, you can't cut back and get them to rejuvenate. But on any of the leafy deciduous type shrubs, that can work very, very well. I might mention like on lilacs. Lilacs is a classic case that over years, sometimes they've gotten leggy, and a good rejuvenation, cutting them back. Now, if a lilac is rejuvenated in spring, it won't bloom this year. But if you really need it rejuvenated, that's okay. If you just need a little light trimming, well, then wait until after it blooms, then you can do a little trimming. Because you see, lilac buds are set down last summer, and that's why they can pop forth in May. But you see, if you do pruning in spring, you're cutting off those flower buds, and so that's why it won't bloom. But if you really need it to be rejuvenated, it's better to do it in early spring. Otherwise, if it's in full leaf and you cut it way back, it's a little tougher on it. I also might mention that, sometimes in some literature you'll see, well, to rejuvenate a shrub, cut back 1/3 of the old this year, 1/3 next year, 1/3. I like to totally cut it back. I've had best success because then that established root system gives that whole big push. If you only cut back 1/3 this year, 1/3 next, well, then you don't get that same big push of energy into the nice new branches. So I prefer to just, prune until it hurts and then prune some more, as the old saying goes. And so as shrubbery, that's kind of the main thing, is that in the spring is, do some pruning if you need before they leaf out, preferably.
I know for our yard, we put up some little chicken wire fence around some of our burning bush that the rabbits would get into.
Rabbit candy.
And so, is that something that generally we notice that they're more inclined, rabbits are more inclined to feed on that during the winter when it's harder to find food. Is it safe to take those off now, or should we wait for a while until there's more other green things?
You hit the nail on the head when you said that during the winter, there's not a whole lot for rabbits. There's no fresh lettuce or no cabbage in my garden for them to go and eat on. So
not that they're invited.
Yeah, exactly. They'll look for other things. And of course, certain shrubs are just candy to them. And of course, your burning bush euonymus is one. Roses, they love those. Yep. But in the summer here or spring, as other things start freshening up, like the grass, clover, and different things, they'll be more attracted to that than they will your burning bush. So I won't say they'll totally leave it alone, but this is typically the time you can take those off.
All right.
Yeah. But if you do take that off and rabbits eat it, I won't be held responsible. How is that?
That's right. This is yeah. So exactly. This is.
We'll put that disclaimer, John.
All right. Well, let's go take another little break. Then when we come back, we're going to talk about one of the favorite things, the veggie garden.
Vegetables. I love it.
When you can't make it to City Hall or school board meetings, local journalists from Inforum.com will be there to report the facts and get your questions answered. Local news works for you. Stay up to date at Inforum.com.
All right, so we're back and we're talking about things to do now that things are starting to green up in the yard and garden, things to do. We talked about the lawns, we talked about the trees, we talked about perennial gardens, talked about shrubs. Let's talk about probably some people's favorite part is the vegetables and the vegetable gardens, this is vegetable season. Still seems like maybe it's a ways away, but maybe there are some things that we should be doing now.
Yeah, and I feel just like we've taken a complete walk around the yard and garden. So I'm in my own mind, I'm picturing now we're out at our vegetable garden. And what's fun with vegetable gardening is there are some things that can be planted early in April here, end of April, and some things that need to wait. And so for those of us that are getting the itch, for example, I bought our seed potatoes yesterday, as a matter of fact. So if you want to get some of the things started, there are what are called cool season crops, okay? And then in a minute, we're going to talk about the warm season crops. So we can divide all our vegetable crops into those two categories. So the cool season crops are crops that will grow fine in cold soil. They love it cool. They'll germinate fine. They'll even tolerate some frost, down to maybe 25 or 28 degrees. And so those can be started now, the last half of April. And in that category, there are things like onions, radish, carrots, lettuce, peas, kale, did I say spinach? Potatoes, like cool soil, they're going to be okay too. And so that whole group could be started. That's when we can start. There's nothing wrong with delaying and planting the whole works, the whole garden in mid-May. Sometimes that's what I do if I don't get the early things planted. But for those that are getting the itch and those crops love it cool, you could get going with those. Now, the other block of vegetables, the warm season crops, do not like cold soil. They won't sprout. In fact, if you plant some of these, they'll go downhill quickly. So warm season crops need to be delayed until the the warm season crops need to be delayed until the soil temperature has gotten nice and warm and when there's not a danger of frost. So we're talking about things like tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, the vine crops, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins,
peas and beans,
squash, beans, string beans. All of those need warm soil in which to sprout. Or example, in the case of tomatoes, where you're planting out a tomato plant. If a tomato plant is put out into the garden soil and the soil temperature is cool, those tomato plants can not only just kind of sit there, but they can be permanently stunted. So even though you could cover a tomato plant to keep it from air frost, it's going to suffer from that cold soil in which you've planted it. So the warm season crops, instead of planting in April or very early May, they're better delayed until the last half of May. So we have warm soil and a less chance of frost. So I like that because it gives us kind of almost two vegetable gardening seasons. You can do the early stuff and wait and do the later stuff.
So now we've been talking about vegetables. Now it's getting me all excited to really, we're talking about starting to plant things. Let's leave the yard and the garden for a little bit. Let's go to a garden center and let's talk about what we should be looking for there. What's kind of time appropriate there?
Well, and when I've driven past the garden centers, I see lots of cars in the parking lot because we're all anxious to get in there and take a look. And of course, sometimes it is fun just to go in and in the greenhouse, the aroma of the soil and the humidity it's refreshing. And so some people like to just go and see what's kind of going on. Other people are kind of ready to buy and plant. So let's take a look at, okay, if you go to the garden center, what could we be actually planting now? Okay, if there are trees and shrubs, adapted trees and shrubs that are not leafed out yet, those could be planted. Because there's nothing there really to freeze off. The branches are winter hardy. If a tree or shrub is leafed out already and you were to plant it and we get a killing frost, those leaves would be burnt off. Might not kill it, but it's going to really set it back. So anything in full leaf should be delayed. Same with perennials. If it's a dormant perennial, such as if someone has dormant peonies or something, those could be planted. Dormant bulbs, they could maybe be planted. But any perennial flowers, even the winter hardy type that are in full leaf, those would be subject to frost, having the leaves die back on frost. And, that's awfully hard on things. So at the garden center, we don't want to be too anxious to buy things and plant them out if they're going to get killed by frost. Now, when Mary and I had our garden center for about 25 years, many people would come in and shop, and they'd buy some material and say, we're not ready to plant yet. We know it's too early. We're going to take these things home, whether it's some shrubs or perennial plants, or maybe it's even some annual plants for their planters. Many people like to shop while the selection is still good. And people would ask, now, okay, I'm going to take these home, not ready to plant maybe for a couple of weeks. Is it okay to put these in the garage until then? And the answer is no. Because these materials have all been grown in sunny greenhouses or out in full sun, and if we put them in our dim garages, they're going to languish. And in the course of a week or 2 weeks, they're going to be weakened. Instead, use this early shopping experience if you want to. Take the material home and use this as a way to harden off the plants. That's the term for getting them used to the outside conditions. So to harden off these plants, whether it's the trees, shrubs, perennials, even some annuals, put them in a protected spot so it's not getting full wind, but let them get some sunshine, let them get some air. Make sure you watch the watering, because now in the greenhouses and places where they've been grown, they're often watered maybe every day. So make sure they don't dry out. And on a chilly night, when it's even going to approach frost, then I'd move them back into the garage for that night, but then out again during the day. So use your early shopping as a way to, take them home. Don't keep them in the garage, but use that as a time to harden these off. And then when you do plant them out into your yard or garden, they're going to be good and tough, and they won't have much transplant shock. So nothing wrong with shopping early, as long as we don't stick them in our dark garage.
And sometimes I do shop a little bit before, even a couple weeks before I'm ready to plant. But we have our porch has glass, it's glassed around,
Sure.
and I can take the glass off once the summer gets here. But so it can add that a little bit extra level of kind of security there, as far as like knowing that it'll keep it warm, it'll keep it regulated a little bit more. So,
that's a nice location, because what if we do get a spell of days, which we sometimes do, where the days are all cold?
Yeah.
We can get that in late April, even early May, when you maybe can't set material outside, then you'll have to keep it, of course, frost protected. But your area there of a good sunny sunroom, that'd be like a greenhouse in which you could keep the material.
Or so if people have like, maybe big patio doors that are facing a certain direction where they're going to get regular good sun in there, maybe they could buy some things and set them there and keep an eye on them and keep them watered.
Exactly.
And that would be good. Let's talk about like one of the other things is it too early to start thinking about soil amendments or things to do to treat the soil in your garden beds? Again, things that we can buy at a garden center, but things in your garden beds that will, once you're ready to plant, just really help things get going. Great
opportunity to add compost to the soil, any organic matter like peat moss, the bags of manure, the composted manure, all of that. This is a good opportunity to get that material down in. And I love organic matter because it's the antidote for soil texture problems. Okay, if you've got heavy clay or if you've got real light sand, organic matter is what helps both. It mellows up the heavy clay soil, so it's more workable. And it also, on a light sandy soil, gives some moisture holding capacity. And most of our plants love a nice, loamy, organic type soil. And so with any perennials, adding a little organic matter kind of right around as you're planting, or even established ones that have been growing for quite a few years, just working little organic matter right around that. It'll kind of filter down the root system. So good opportunity to do that. And also adding any organic type fertilizers or even synthetic type fertilizers can be added as plants start to grow.
Now, I know that because there's still a danger of we may get a spring frost, but for the people who are really, really ready to start putting things together, could they start putting together like containers and things like that? Where would you be on container planting right now? If it was something that you could bring outside, but then also move in, give it a little shelter if it need be.
And of course, container gardening has been so popular, both vegetables, but also container plants, the flowering containers. The plant breeders have developed so many fascinating plants that go in containers. And you see those in front of people's porches and doorsteps, in front of their garages. And it's, good times for flowering container gardenings. And it's fun to go and shop the garden centers. Many of them have things that are getting ready to be planted. But again, all of those materials are frost sensitive. If we get down towards 32 degrees, many of those plants would be killed, which means if you want to start planting those things up on chilly nights, and I know the extended forecast, you can't rely on those because the weatherman said you can't extend that far out. But I looked at the next month, the month of May, and there were a couple in the long-range forecast that it did look like it was about 32 degrees. Whether that'll materialize, who knows? But anyway, that would mean that on chilly nights, if it's going to get down low 30s or even mid-30s, those containers would have to be moved into the garage or protected. And so that brings us up to kind of the interesting point. When is it safe to plant? Our growing season has been extended. We know the people that keep track of the number of growing days and how long our season is. Our seasons have extended. But especially at the back end, I don't trust May. I'm not seeing the earliness at the beginning of the season, because what's more disappointing than to plant your tomatoes out early or pot up a nice big pot of beautiful coleus and everything else and then have a frost kill it. Okay, and so I don't trust May, because May, more often years than not, will have killing frost in May. Not always, but May is typically, we can get killing frost. I like the 10-day period, May 15th to May 25th. I like to look at that 10-day period, and if it looks like it's fairly warm, frost-free, that's when I do most of our gardening. Most of the things that would be frost-sensitive, I plant out then. Some of the things, if the temperatures are too cool, they're not going to do anything anyway. And especially if we get, a few warm days, but then you get some cold days and a few more warm days. If the temperature hasn't stabilized, it can be kind of hard on things. Coleus is a good example. It doesn't even have to really freeze. But if we have a number of days where the highs were in the 40s, boy, do they pout.
Yeah.
And so anyway, and the wisdom of old gardeners taught me this, and it hasn't really changed, that you can't trust May. And so I keep my eyes out. It doesn't mean I'm not going to plant anything, because I love to plant. But I really do eye May suspiciously and watch it really carefully.
Welcome it in when it's ready, but keep an eye on it.
Keep an eye on May.
Well, this has been really great, because I know it's
fun walk around the yard and garden.
And I'm sure everyone's just kind of itching to get out there. So this gives us some things that we can get out and do. Gives us a couple of first steps. Lots of good work. Spend time outside, and it'll help plan your garden too. And so that when the time comes that we're sure that it's time to plant, we'll have a better idea of what to do and where to go.
I've been waiting all winter for this.
It's a great time.
It is.
Well, Don, if people have more questions for you about their garden going forward or their garden in the past, things that are doing well, things that are not doing well, what's the best way that they can reach you?
Send me an email, donald.kinsler, spelled KINZLER, at ndsu.edu. And thanks very much for listening.
And people are welcome to send in photos too.
Oh, definitely. A photo is worth, 1,000 words, 1,000,000 words, lots of words.
Well, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Have a good week.